I'm Kevin Davis. This is the Catholic Family Podcast. It's wonderful to be back with everybody. I know we've been kind of spare in our podcast with my interviews. It's Lent, so we haven't recorded as much. We have had a lot of the Lenten material, which we hope that you've enjoyed. Thank you very much to Father Timothy Geckel for providing that. But today we're joined by Mauro Stenico. Mauro's been on the show a couple times, coming over from Italy, one of my European buddies. It's great to have you back, Mauro. And we've had a couple shows already with Mauro talking about science and the Catholic Church. They've been absolutely fantastic. It's always, we do these shows and afterwards I'm like, my brain is still working for the next 2 or 3 hours. So I literally, it's funny. Like the last few times I had to go into bed because it's already, we're recording this at 8 o'clock. And so we'll finish at 9 o'clock or something. And I have to go into bed and read a little bit to try to calm my brain down a little bit just so I can sleep. So really fascinating material. I always love having Mauro on. And today we're going to talk a little bit of a kind of a similar topic, but a slight change. And that is Stalin and the universe. That's the title, Stalin and the Universe, How Revolution Imposes Itself on the Cosmos, which automatically to me, Mauro kind of pitched this idea to me. I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. So kind of how did communism affect quote unquote science or actual science, not just quote unquote science? So I'm really interested for this. I'm excited to, as always, talk with Mauro. So Mauro, I guess I'll hand it over to you. Wherever you want to begin, let's get into it.
Okay. So thank you, Kevin. Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me on your YouTube channel once again. I'm very happy about that. So the idea about Stalin and the universe, communism and the universe, communism and cosmology is very strange, apparently, because how does politics have to do with cosmology? What's that relationship? How is it possible? I mean, politics regarding cosmology? Yes, it is indeed possible because when I did my doctoral work, I studied on modern cosmology, history of science. I studied the multiple relationships between cosmology and some political ideologies of the 20th century, as for example, communism, even also National Socialism, the East Germany, and so on. And I found a lot of documents regarding how the Communist Party or the Nazi Party did impose a certain line on cosmology, as and also on biology and so on. So that's the point. But before starting, I think we need a little introduction about modern cosmology. I think we should say some things about that because the interaction between politics, communism, and so on regards modern cosmology. So, as you know, Kevin, the the cosmological paradigm is the one of the Big Bang theory. So, the Big Bang theory was a great novelty in the 20th century compared to Kantian Newtonian cosmology, in which the universe is infinite, eternal, and static. On the contrary, for modern cosmology, the current constitution of the universe is not eternal, but the result of a violent event, a so-called Big Bang. Big Bang means like something like a big boom, a big explosion. It's not really properly scientific to see Big Bang as an explosion, but it's our collective idea about that. There was a beginning of this process of expansion, which started 14 billion years ago from an ultra-dense, ultra-hot state of matter, which is called the cosmological singularity. So the main point.
Just real quickly, just interesting. I think there's a couple comments I have there because I saw it. There's a great meme that I saw, I don't know, years ago, and it says, "In the beginning, there was nothing, which exploded." I just think that's great. So it's like there was nothing, and then nothing exploded, and that's kind of in my mind. That's what I'd see as the Big Bang. It's like, wait, okay, what exploded? Okay, even if you believe in all that, something had to have created the thing that exploded, right? A thing cannot just exist in itself; it has to have a creator. But it's also interesting. And we don't have to get into this, but I always find it interesting how they say 14 billion years ago. It's just like, from what? Like, where does that number come from? It's just like, I always wonder, like these scientists just kind of, throw up numbers are just like, yeah, 14 billion or 10 billion. It's like,
Mm,
what's that based on? I mean, I
not
don't know
that
if we got to get into that, but I always find it interesting.
because we have some empirical data to study the movement of the galaxies, this recession, mutual recession of galaxies. And the first empirical data is the so-called redshift, which is the fact that the light of galaxies moving away from us, really from each other, is moving toward red, which means the red end of the electromagnetic spectrum, which means they are receding from us. They are mutually receding. And then you can study this dynamic and you can infer from the movement of galaxies and also the age of the oldest galaxies and so on, the age of the universe, which is really 13.8 billion years. I said 14 billion years is really 13.8. So there is the possibility to measure the age of the universe. We know for sure that the universe began a finite age ago, a finite time ago. So the universe is not eternal. That, I think, it's the greatest point of modern cosmology. And because before modern cosmology, it was thought that the universe was eternal. For example, within Kantian paradigm, Newtonian one, and so on. So that was really a great novelty from the beginning. I think the first decades of the 20th century in cosmology. And I should also say that one of the greatest, the main protagonist was Georges Lemaitre, Father Georges Lemaitre, because a Belgian cosmologist, but also a Catholic priest, which had a very important role in modern cosmology, and which was practically expelled, I think, in the sense of his works from Soviet Union. So you could not mention the name of Lemaitre in the Soviet Union, because in the Soviet Union, the universe had to be seen as eternal, because matter is eternal. There is the material dialectic and so on. But I think we will talk about that later.
But wasn't Newton a devout Catholic too? Maybe I'm remembering that
No,
wrong.
Catholic, no, not
He
really
was not a
Catholic.
Catholic. Okay, I must be
No,
thinking of someone else. Okay,
no, no.
interesting.
So Newton believed in God, but was not Catholic.
Okay, got it.
No Catholic. No. It
Interesting.
was, I would say, not really also a Protestant. It's something different. Okay,
Okay, so
but
okay, yeah, not an atheist, but not okay. Okay,
no,
interesting. Yeah,
absolutely. It
yeah.
is absolutely not atheist, because
Mm-hmm.
he talks about God. I think we can say that Newton wrote much more about religion, for example, about the apocalypse, than about science. This is not really widely known by the public opinion, but it is a fact that Newton talked more about religion than about science.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yes.
he's one. I think I remember hearing a story about him. Again, I could be confusing my scientists here, but I think it was him that had a lot of his studies and his famous experiments and whatnot were. I think he wasn't it right during a plague. I think he had to stay
Yeah.
at home, or there was something like
Yeah.
he couldn't go out, so he had to stay at home, and so he's like, okay, well, got to do something, and so he founded all these theories and whatnot, which is pretty interesting. And but I'd heard that actually before, that he was that was not his primary task. He was a true Renaissance man, and just kind of happened to like, hey, okay, well, I'm stuck in my room, so I better do a little science, which is pretty interesting.
You're right. There was a plague in London in, if I remember, 1666, and he went out of the city because he could allow them. He could do that. He could do that because he came from a rich family. And during the plague, when he had to stay home, he studied the light, so the color of light and so on. He did his first experiments. That's correct. That's correct.
Interesting. It's funny how that works.
Yes.
Anyway, okay, I'm going off topic. All right, go ahead, go ahead. Let's get back to our topic of communism in science.
So we say that before that there was beginning of the universe in the sense of this cosmological singularity. And from this cosmological singularity, there was we say usually say, but it's not scientifically right to say that. Anyway, we say that it's an explosion and an expansion occurred. Um, and then scientists do think that since then the universe has been expanding, and according to the second law of thermodynamics, the so-called entropy, it seems to be destined to hit death. So the universe is going to die because in the future he won't have any reserve of energy anymore. So he's going to finish his energy. So the birth of new stars, of new galaxies will be impossible. And as every creature, the universe had a beginning, has a growth, and will have a hand. A end. So that's a very important point of modern cosmology. There was some historical phases in the 20th century. For example, there was Albert Einstein in 1917 with his Kosmologische Betrachtungen. It is in German, an article written in German, in which he says that the universe is finite, unlimited, closed, spherical, homogeneous, and isotropic. So the universe is the same, physically the same everywhere. Then there were the so-called first mathematical models of the dynamic cosmos, coming from a Russian mathematician, Alexander Friedman. Alexander Friedman died in 1925, so before Stalin began his career in the party as the strongest man, of the party. And after that, under Stalin, it was not possible to mention the name of Friedman anymore, because Friedman showed that the universe, from a mathematical point of view, had a beginning. So it was very important. But the problem was that Friedman did not have empirical data. And then, of course, came Georges Lemaitre. Lemaitre proposed the first physical models of the dynamical cosmos. So not only mathematics, but also empirical data, for example, redshift, and also other empirical data. So I think, Kevin, we won't analyze the role of this data, because not because it's not interesting, but because we don't have time now to do it.
Sure.
But it was a powerful proof for the beginning and for the expansion of the universe. In fact, indeed, in 1931, Lemaitre was the first man in science to propose the hypothesis of the so-called primordial atom. So everything starting from a single point. This is like the father of this modern cosmological singularity. And then for reasons we don't scientifically know, because scientifically we don't know how it happened, this primordial atom broke, and the expansion started. So Lemaitre was the first to talk in the 20th century about beginning of the universe. Big Bang is a name which came decades during the next decade, and it was given by an enemy of the Big Bang model, which who was Fred Hoyle. Sir Fred Hoyle was a British astronomer, a very important British astronomer, but he didn't accept the idea that the universe had a beginning. So in order to make fun of this theory, he said, oh yes, there is this school of thought which say there was a Big Bang, and this Big Bang, this name had a very, very strong impression, created a very strong impression on the public opinion, and it is also nowadays the name of a scientific theory. But if you think about that, Kevin, Big Bang is not really scientific. Big Bang, what is it's a very, very strange name, and indeed it came from an enemy of the Big Bang theory. So
Interesting. And so I guess, I mean, the So this is obviously, as you're saying, the modern idea of scientific of how the universe was started. I mean, I guess the older version, pre even Newton, would have been like the physical creation. I suppose. I guess much more. Yeah, I don't know. You know, simple. I suppose. The idea that God just created things. Kind of much more literally according to the Bible. So I mean,
Yeah,
I guess that's kind of not the point we're making here. The point is that it still had to have had a beginning, right?
of
I think
course.
that's the point. That it's like, if you're just saying the creation is eternal, then you don't necessarily need a creator. But even then, it doesn't make any sense, because I mean, how could it be? So I see where you're coming from there, and just as long as the listeners know, I'm more of a what do you call it? Because creationism is the wrong word, but more of a literal interpreter of the Bible. But it's interesting. It's interesting to hear more of the theory, the modern theory of yeah, as you say, it's not really the Big Bang, but of how things came to be, I suppose.
So I think one point, Kevin, is very important to say. Once in some centuries ago, scientists were also great philosophers. So it was normal for a scientist to be also as a philosopher. I mean that in the 19th and 20th century, there was a partition between science and philosophy, which I think it's not really 100% correct, because even if you do science, you need philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So the important point about this model of Big Bang model is that from a metaphysical point of view, you can't expel the need for a cause. So you always need a cause, a first mover, a first cause. So if you as a scientist say, okay, I can know the universe starting from 13.8 billion years ago, and before I can not apply my science to this moment, because I don't have any model. You need an interaction between quantum gravity, general relativity, but we don't have such a theory at the moment. But then you, as a philosopher, can always say there was a cause. You need a cause. And the problem is that today many scientists don't want to admit the need of a first mover, and they propose, on the contrary, something strange like this multiverse theory.
Mm-hmm.
There are there is an infinite number of universe, so you don't have an absolute beginning. But we don't have any proof about that, any proof about the multiverse, about parallel universes, and so on. We don't have any proof. We only have mathematical equations, but mathematical equations are not empirical proofs, are not
Mm-hmm.
definite proofs, I mean.
Well, I think you make it the point of philosophy and science. It's like it's also faith in science. When you take out faith, you can
Yeah.
just get a bunch of different kind of crazy ideas. I mean, I saw Elon Musk the other day saying something about how he really starts to think that it's something like the human consciousness is obviously a downloaded code from something. I forget the
Yeah.
exact quote, but just very silly stuff. It's just like, well, what? What are you talking about? You mean the soul? You mean there's a soul? You mean there's something beyond our physical being, which I think we all, of course, agree with. But then to connect that with some kind of computer download, you just see again when you're a really smart guy and you're connecting just science and what you know, and you don't have faith, you go down some really crazy rabbit holes, which is interesting. Again, I think that's again kind of what we're talking about with the Soviets. Like, hey, let's keep God out of this, guys, and I think that's so much of what we see in our society now, right? I mean, so much of
Yeah.
this is communism. We don't talk about it, but America, for goodness sake, is even now is still so much more communist than I think we can understand, and a lot of that being that trying to keep God out of everything.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. But if you want, Kevin, now we can enter the Soviet Union to
Good.
get the point. So, in the first year of the Soviet Union, there was a resistance regarding relativity, quantum mechanics and modern cosmology. But I want only to talk about modern cosmology, not quantum mechanics, because also in this case we don't have any time to do that. So we would stay here until tomorrow, I think. So in the Soviet Union, the resistance to modern cosmology is mixed with the dialectical materialism, because you cannot understand the approach of Soviet Union regarding modern cosmology if you don't know the philosophy of the Communist Party, which is the dialectical materialism. So we can see the works of Friedrich Engels, Karl Marx, Lenin, Stalin, and so on. There are some basic principles regarding this philosophy. First of all, matter is the only principle for explaining the entire reality through a process of dialectical differentiation. So, from the first living cell to more complex living forms, apes, man, consciousness, society, and all is guided, of course, by the blind chance, because you don't have to have a creator. So chance is your creator, right? That's the point. So no being, no ens, we use this Latin word, is static. All is subjected to perpetual change through self-evolution, self-motion. If we read, for example, the Anti-Düring of Friedrich Engels, we see, I read it, motion, change, is the mode of existence of matter. Matter without motion is unthinkable, as motion without matter. So everything is subjected to perpetual change, as we said before, an eternal cycle of transformation. Nothing is wasted, not even heat. The matter is God. The real matter of the communist is the God of the communist, which is eternal, infinite, indestructible, self-sufficient, and self-moving and self-evolving. No intervention from outside is allowed. And this is the first point. The second point, which is a law of dialectical materialism, is that the one of the conversion of quantity into new quality. So every change in nature results from the quantitative addition or subtraction of matter or movement from a given entity. So Engels means that the accumulation of quantitative changes results in the sudden and violent emergence of new qualitative changes, from inert matter to the first cellular protist, from non-life to life. Using this Engels defines them dialektische Sprünge, which is dialectical jumps. So, from a point to another, you have a jump from a form of existence to another form of existence through this accumulation of quantitative changes. That's the problem. But this philosophy is not really explaining how for example, life begins from non-life, from inert matter. So there isn't a clear explanation about that. But we know for sure, Engels say, that matter is always evolving. We don't know how life started, but we will, of course, says Engels, we will, of course, discover it in the future. So it is even also here a matter of faith. You have to have faith in the evolution. The human being, as we know him, is of course not the ultimate aim of evolution. So even we were ourselves are going to through a process of evolution, and this is the problem of transhumanism, as you said before regarding Elon Musk. So we are not the final state of evolution. We are only an intermediate state of this evolution. But after man, we will have, for example, Superman. We don't know, but another form of evolution with different peculiarities from the ones we have now. So another interesting point is that communists are very interested in the search for the extraterrestrial life.
Hmm.
You know why? Because it is a problem of the dialectical materialism. So as life arose here, it must, no, it is possible, it must also arise elsewhere, because there is a dialectic between chance and necessity. So I
Hmm.
explained that in this sense. In an infinite and eternal universe, the same fortunate blind combination of elements for life must happen many times. I would say an infinite number of times, because if you have an eternal and infinite universe in which always is changing, so the same things which happen here should happen, must happen elsewhere in the universe. So we are not alone in the universe. This is a necessity for the communist outlook and so on. So as you see, Kevin, the diamet, so dialectical materialism, is like a religion. It is full of articles one has to believe. Because Kevin, if you
Right.
want to discuss about the possibility of life elsewhere in the universe, then I'm ready to discuss about that. No problem to discuss about that. But if you say it is a necessity, that's a problem, because you have to prove it. So we can discuss from a philosophical point of view, if you like, also from a theological point of view, the problem of evil and so on, but incarnation and so on. I'm ready to discuss about that, but you can say it's a necessity.
You,
Instead, in the Soviet Union, it was a necessity.
you know what always strikes me about the Soviet Union, communism, this entire philosophy, as you say, really this religion. It's
Yeah,
so depressing that there's no happiness from it. There's no future. You're nothing. Your existence means nothing. There's other existences everywhere else. You don't matter. You came from sludge. You're pretty much an ape. You're an animal. There's no spirit in you. And it's that's what kind of blows me away. That it's like I understand where it came from. You had leaders who wanted to control millions, hundreds of millions of people, really at times, and so I understand that, but have such a hard time understanding how your normal person could be bought into this because there's so little hope. There's almost no hope. It is a totally hopeless philosophy, and again, a religion. And it always boggles my mind. The more you look into this, and the more of what they actually believe, it's so sad. It's just like I'm so glad. I'm so glad I'm not a communist because this is. I'm so glad I have faith in this hope of eternity and God, and that I am special. That I have an eternal soul. That is an extremely hopeful, and it's also a little scary, obviously, if I believe in damnation,
yeah,
but it's also hopeful because I mean, if you truly believe that I am just an animal, that when I die, it's the end. Oof, there's not much hope there.
yeah. No, not at all, not at all. But let's consider communism from a religious point of view. So, communism has a dogmatic doctrine of reference, which is Marxism Leninism, an eschatological vision, the classless society, its authorities, Lenin, Engels, Marx, Stalin, its text, sacred text, the classics of Marxism Leninism, its saints, Pavlik Morozov, Alexei Stakhanov, Stakhanovism, and so on. A hierarchical structure, the various sections of the party, and then official rights, as for example the annual parades in honor of the revolution, which were which were mandatory in Soviet Union, but also in Romania and in East Germany and so on. But there is a point, a very important point, also on science, because in Marxism, Leninism, the class struggle, the principle of class struggle, must permeate all sciences. So, communists, and in this, I think they are honest. I think, at least they are honest, disapprove the so called claimed neutrality of science, because they say science is not neutral, because if you say science is neutral, this is a Western hypocrisy to hide the bourgeois interests. So the interests of the bourgeois. So at least we can partially agree, because also nowadays science is not always neutral. So it comes, for example, from politics or from a certain ideology regarding the universe, the origin of life. So in this sense, they weren't false at all, communist, I mean, but of course they did have their own ideology, their own blind ideology, which is the dialectical materialism. Because in Soviet Union, scientists, artists, men of letters, poets, filmmakers, and so on, must be guided by the principles of the principle of the so-called Partynosht, which means partisanship, which means the total acceptance of the party line in all social, scientific, and cultural fields. So you have to respect the party line in each fields, science, literature, culture, and so on. It is mandatory. So you're not free. You're not free to do your own research. That's the point.
And it's
And
really interesting if you travel, as I'm sure you have,
yeah,
of course, if you go into the former Soviet Union. So I've been into Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic now, and you can just immediately see you cross the border from Germany into Czech Republic, and you see the communism still this is 2025, and you still see the effects of it, of the poorness. The buildings are ugly, and you see it in Germany too, honestly. But I mean, it's a little not quite so easy to see, I suppose. But it's just interesting that because of what you're saying, exactly, they had to hold by the party lines. And it's interesting too, you look at the military. Stalin came in and he killed all of his generals pretty much because he was so afraid of them taking over, and etc. He killed all of them. That was part of the issue with the beginning of the war. So he didn't have any of his actual leadership because this religion creates such a fear of everyone, because you can't have actual honest participation or whatnot. It has to be partisan.
yeah.
If it's not going to be partisan, then, well, boom, 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 you're all going to have to die. Pretty incredible. Yeah.
And the same was also with science, as we'll see it in the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, with Soviet scientists. So in Soviet Union, there is the beginning of an opposition, a strong opposition, which between the so-called progressive science and clerical science. So if you are not communist, you are certainly you are centered in the field of the clerical science, which is a science which serves bourgeois interests, which saves, for example, that the universe had a beginning, but we know if you are communist, that matter doesn't have a beginning, and so on. So you're a supporter of clerical science, because you say there was a first cause, so God, and this is the drug for the oppression of the people, Marxism, and so on. So under Lenin, who died in 1924, and the so-called new economic policy, there were episodes of persecution also under Lenin, including cultural persecution, and the first gulag were built under Lenin. But when I studied these dynamics, I realized that Soviet astronomers established a certain collaboration with Western scientists. They wrote scientific articles in foreign journals. They had their research trips abroad, also in the United States. And the Pulkovo Observatory, which is near St. Petersburg, the former Leningrad, became an international center of attraction. So scientists from all over the world traveled to Soviet Union to see this observatory. That was really a nice, so-called a nice time for Soviet astronomy. But everything changed under Stalin, because there was the so-called cultural revolution from 1927 to 1929. The party under Stalin gained absolute control over culture and science, absolute control. The winning Stalinian strategy of the so-called socialism in one country gathered also the Soviet scientific communities. So Stalin says practically, revolution happened only here in the Soviet Union. So before making a revolution outside Soviet Union, we have to defend, we have to strengthen our own revolution in our territory, and then later we will think about world revolution, so an international communist revolution. But now we are in the Soviet Union, we have to think about Soviet revolution. So scientists of the only country where the revolution had won were also the only ones who could claim to be the true spokesman for Marxism, Leninism in science. So Stalin dismissed this policy of Lenin and proclaimed the first 5-year plan, which was a disaster for Soviet Union, but also mass murders, as for example the murders of kulaks, which were people working in agriculture, and they were considered as rich men, representatives of the bourgeois world, and wa- um, Stalin wanted to get rid of them. So there was a great persecution. Thousands and thousands of people were assassinated, were murdered, and so on. But there was also the so-called Holodomor in Ukraine, which caused the death of millions of
Crazy.
people,
Yeah.
from we think between 4 and 6 million of people. This was the Holodomor, and the public fake trials full of fabrications, because Stalin wanted to get rid of the old guard of the revolution, because there were, from a political point of view, there were very strong people, very strong people. There was possible opposers to Stalin. Stalin succeeded not only in emerging always as the savior of the nation, but also to rally the nation against the so-called enemies of the people,
Hmm.
a supposed network of the internal enemies who were called the counter-revolutionaries, plotting for the destruction of the USSR. So in Stalin's mind, there was always this idea: there are enemies inside the Soviet Union who want to kill me, who want to destroy the party line, who are working for a counter revolution against the revolution. As for example, it happened during the French Revolution. It's always so. The same process, process.
After Martin Luther, right? Yeah, we call it the
Okay.
Counter Reformation, but really it was a counter revolution in this sense. I mean, of course, in the church, it was coming and saying, "Hey, these people are revolting. They're giving us a crazy revolution here. We're gonna go against them, obviously, as a counter attack, I suppose." And it's interesting. Just a real quick comment, because I'm reading another book
Yeah.
about the Elizabethan times in England. So
Mhm.
also end of the 1500s, and it's just interesting to see the kind of the how you see the correlation of these monarchs. So Stalin, Elizabeth. You see the times during Martin Luther as well, that they brought in their ideologies. They took out God, or they took out the Catholic Church at least. And it's amazing what happens. And you saw this certainly in Russia or the Soviet Union. You saw it in England and in Germany and other places in Europe. That when you do that, and when you persecute the Catholic Church, the monasteries and the priests, your science goes away. It's really incredible that you can go back and you can look. And I know they were mentioning this about the time of Luther, that they had certain technologies during his time, and when they got rid of all the monasteries, they lost it. They lost the ways that they. I think one of the examples was how they built fireplaces. I think something like that. Some engineering. And once they kicked pretty much the Catholic Church out of Germany or areas of Germany, they couldn't do it again for hundreds of years. And it's just fascinating. I think you see this also with the USSR, that they, he persecuted all these people, and he got rid of the Catholics, who are your smartest, most wise people on earth. And it's just interesting how it happens throughout history. It's not just this one time, and it's a fascinating study of human nature, I suppose.
Yeah. And another thing is that the fact that the scientific roots of modern science began within Christian Europe, because even if you are an atheist, the principle of the fact that the universe is intelligible is you can study it. All these principles do come from our Christian outlook. That's incredible. We should always remember that. That's a very great point in the history of science. So
Absolutely.
anyway, okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, under Stalin, class struggle and dialectical materialism were mandatory in science and culture, but this was until the end of Soviet Union, of course. But under Stalin, it was very, very, very more. It was the strongest point in the Soviet Union about that, because sciences had to work to eradicate each form of religious prejudice, as they said. Scientific institutions were purged from undesirable elements, undesirable people. So people who did not really agree with the party line, so they were expelled, they were arrested, or they were imprisoned, and so on. This was the process of Bolshevization of the institutions. And this is very interesting, because if you want, we can have a parallel with contemporary, with our contemporary age. It was the time of the scientist ideologues, which are scientists not properly competent in their field, but politically faithful to the party line, and they had a great career under Stalin, because they are a trustworthy element from a political point of view,
Yes,
even
man.
if they were not great scientists. But they did what the party did them to say, to say and to do. That's another point. So in Soviet cosmology, there are some mandatory and ideological lines. I would like to emphasize at least two mandatory lines, ideologically mandatory lines. So first one, the universe cannot have an absolute beginning or an end, since matter is eternal. So first point. Second point, infinity must be preserved in time and space, but at least in time. So after Stalin, you can say, for example, that the universe is not infinite in space, but you have to say it is infinite in time, so it is eternal. You can say, and after Stalin, not under Stalin, after Stalin. So after Stalin's death in 1953, there was a Big Bang, there was a beginning, but only if you say the Big Bang was the beginning of a new form of life of the universe in an eternal cycle, not an absolute beginning. So you cannot say Big Bang is an absolute beginning. And talking about that, if you want, even in Western cosmology, you cannot really say that Big Bang is creation, because creation is a metaphysical concept. So you cannot do this equation between Big Bang and creation. I think it's very dangerous, because I don't know, maybe in 100 years we will discover that the Big Bang is false. So even if the church said creation was the Big Bang, it would be very, very, very very dangerous. Dangerous. We can say that there was a beginning of the universe and then stop. From a scientific point of view, we can not go on.
Hmm.
On the contrary, in the Soviet Union, you have to say that the Big Bang was certainly the beginning of a new form of life of the universe in an infinite cycle, in an eternal cycle. So you can even not have a doubt about an absolute beginning, because we can have this doubt. The Big Bang maybe was the beginning, the absolute beginning. We don't know, because it is a scientific hypothesis. This is very, very interesting. In the Soviet Union, given the faith in the eternity of matter, you have to say that the Big Bang was only a phase of an
Hmm.
eternal life of the universe.
Strange.
Right? So, the so-called clerical cosmology contradicts this principle, I mean the principles of dialectical materialism. In the West, science, the church and the capital gave birth to a grand alliance to combat communism, thus distorting the conception of the universe, also for political reasons, the oppression of the people. Why oppression of the people? Because if you say that the universe had a beginning, then you're saying there is a God. So the church, for the Marxist outlook, is the oppression of the people, and so on. You should not talk about a first mover or a God. What did the Soviet cosmologists propose? Which are the Soviet alternatives? So I emphasize our attention on three Soviet alternative cosmological models. So, a first possible model, you can say the cosmos is infinite and eternal, not expanding, with an alternative interpretation of empirical data such as the redshift. So, the universe is static, but infinite and eternal. A second model, only the so-called metagalaxy, which is the observable region of the universe. So the universe, the part of the universe we can observe with instruments and so on, which is called by the Soviets metagalaxy. Metagalaxy is expanding and has a beginning, but not the entire universe. So the universe is infinite. The
Hmm.
metagalaxy is a part of the universe, the observable region of the universe. This part can be expanding, can have a beginning, can have an end, but certainly not the universe as a whole, because it is eternal and infinite. Or a third possible model, but only after Stalin, Big Bang is a new phase of the eternal life of the universe. So there are these three alternatives, these three Soviet options in modern cosmology. And I cannot imagine how difficult it was under Stalin for a Soviet astronomer to see that the universe had a beginning. But you cannot say that. That's the problem. So how could you feel in your mind, because you have stronger punishments? So you there was an imprisonment or execution during the time of the great purges.
Yeah, and I know it's not as extreme, but I mean, look what happened during COVID, right? I mean,
Okay.
whatever the truth was, people who
Yeah.
had a different opinion than what the
Yeah.
government was saying, okay, they weren't killed or thrown in prison, but people lost their jobs, and people are, you say, hey, you're a doctor, and you're not, wait, you're saying something against what the state is saying, okay, then you're not a doctor anymore. That happened. That just happened. I mean, whatever the truth is, that is an incredible thing, as you say, when the state starts getting involved with science. Obviously, well, there goes science, because science has to have an open mind and be able to actually study, and to put things to the test, rather than like, okay, you're going to believe this, and that's your science. It's incredible that I think so many people these days don't understand that, and you saw it again during
Mm.
COVID, at least in America. I don't know in Italy. In Germany,
No,
obviously, I
no,
think it was the
that's
same.
very
But
strong.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, I know our primary one of our primary doctors in America, Fauci, you probably know his name. At
Yeah.
one point, he literally said, "I am science." Like, he actually said that, and it's like, it's crazy. It really is, and it all kind of rings from this, right? This idea that they can just, you know, if the state says it, it's what it is, and it's a scary thing, and it's
Oh,
pretty communistic.
Kevin, COVID here in Italy was a very, very bad time. A very bad time. If you have some doubts, if you have some different opinions, it was really a problem.
Crazy.
No, it's really crazy. So to say that all these dynamics we are discussing about are not gone, are not part of the past. They are current dynamics, and can so the if you want, there is a new version of the old practices, but they come again, and I think they will come again in the future on other subject matters, for example, such as, for example, climate changes and
Mm.
so on. You know that. So
They
we'll
certainly
see.
tried. Yeah. Yeah,
Mm,
and honestly, I think climate change, I agree, they definitely tried that. I think what scares me is, like, the Elon Musk stuff, the transhumanism, that idea that they're gonna plant a chip inside our brains, and it's gonna make us
yeah.
these superhumans. I think they're gonna really push that, and that's terrifying. I think that's something I think they're gonna be like, "No, this is the best thing, it's good, and Elon Musk's the good guy, and look at all the good things he's done, and he's so smart." And they're gonna say, "Okay, people, go put a chip in your brain, and it's gonna make you super intelligent." And it's like, what? I mean, what are we doing? And I think you're so right that it's like, if we don't learn from the past,
No,
and we
no,
never
we
do,
didn't.
right? We never learn from the past, and I think that's why again, it's so good to have these types of programs, because I think it's good for people to see, like, whoa, that stuff sounds pretty familiar. That sounds like that's happened before, and it did, and it did. I mean,
Yeah,
again,
yeah,
and we're
I
not
agree.
saying
I
that
agree
maybe
with
they
you.
didn't go and just, shoot people like Stalin did, but it was a milder version of exactly what we're reading right now, and we have to be aware of that, and yeah, have our eyes open, and be, yeah, honest with
Or,
ourselves when it comes.
or I give you another example. Is the same thing when you talk, for example, about Russia and Ukraine now.
Hmm,
So there is only one version.
right.
You cannot disagree. It's impossible. Impossible.
Yep.
So there is a censorship also here in Italy, I think also in Germany, and in the United States. So, but now maybe now with Trump, it's a little bit
A little
different,
better. Yeah. Yeah.
little better. But
But other things
you,
other things are bad again. So it's like,
yeah,
like, Trump comes in and some things are better, but then he's also saying that, Israel is pretty much this
yeah, yeah.
wonderful,
I
worshipful
know,
place. And it's like,
I know.
what?
Yeah.
Uh, what are we doing? I mean, they're just another country who's okay, they can be our ally. That's fine. I don't mind if they're all right. But anyway, we're going off topic, but it's like, what are we doing, guys? Come on, let's calm down. One other point, kind of off that topic, but it's interesting going back to the religious side of this, because it makes me kind of think of, like, was it pantheism, where it's kind of like the worship of the earth, kind of the earth is God and everything is God, kind of. That's kind of what this sounds like. They wouldn't say that. They would say they don't believe in God, I think. But it is. I mean, if you think the earth and the universe is eternal, don't you kind of have to believe that it's God in a way, at least? I mean, again, I know they don't say that, but that's kind of what they believed in. They're kind of saying that, like, everything is God, and so nothing is God, I suppose, which is, again, very depressing philosophy.
Because Kevin, we humans as creatures, we have God in our mind and in our heart, so we cannot get rid of God. It's impossible. So if we don't believe God is eternal and so on, we have to to have another God,
Yeah.
because which can be, for example, matter, word, the earth itself, as you see, for example, in the Gaia hypothesis, no, and so on. So because we are creatures, so we know we need a cause, an higher cause, which cannot be matter, which cannot be the blind chance and so on. So we need a creator. You don't believe in God, you will believe probably that the universe itself is God, that matter itself is God, and so on. As for example, the communists did. And
Hmm.
that's another point to discuss, so maybe in another episodes, in
Well,
another.
and it's interesting too, because again, it gets to that idea of why then they just feel like they can just persecute people, right? They can just murder people because the person, the individual's sacredness, right? Like our eternal soul and our eternal importance just doesn't matter, right? Because we're it's all kind of gods or whatever, doesn't matter. But we're all from apes, so it's really a very disgusting philosophy and theology, really. And this is why we've seen hundreds of millions of people murdered or killed by communism, because they take away all individual um, goodness or anything with the individual. All it becomes about, really it comes about the state, which is, again, it's kind of an incredible thing that I kind of see sometimes, the comparison between Islam and communism. The people on top, I think, are kind of sitting there smiling like, you know, we they don't Stalin didn't actually believe in communism, right? No, come on. The guy he wanted to have power, he wanted to control the country, and he understood, if he said all these things, that's what it was. At least that's my idea. Maybe he was an ideologue, I don't know. But it's kind of, to me, that's kind of how you see it with Islam too. You had these leaders who just kind of understood, we're going to say this and this, and the people are going to follow us, and they did. And that's, I guess, as we see, happened for thousands of years.
But I think a problem here is I can pose myself a question. So, if I am an atheist, why can I not kill people? Why? What?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Because if you kill me, I kill you. That's it. That is an utilitarian point of view. But you're not giving me a deep answer. So why can I not kill people if I'm an atheist? Why should I be moral and so on? Because in fact, in the atheistic outlook of the world, you have euthanasia, you have abortion, so you are indeed killing people. You are indeed killing people. Maybe if I am an atheist, I won't kill you, Kevin, because it's possible, but I wouldn't probably pose myself any questions, any doubt regarding killing children with abortion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's an interesting point. I mean, I think communism, as we see it in Russia or USSR, it ended because of lots of different reasons, but partly because the people weren't motivated anymore, right? I mean, if you take away again the individual rights and the individual person, then they don't really want to do anything. They're not going to actually have any ambition to make a great country and to love their country and to fight for their country. So there was a lot of different reasons why it failed and why capitalism beat it, in the 1980s. But what's interesting is that I think, and you had the McCarthyism, you had all these different things
Yeah.
happening in the 1960s. I think the communists figured it out, whatever they are, communist, Jews, whatever you want to blame it on. They understood, okay, what we need to do is we have to be a lot more sneaky, a lot more quiet. We're gonna take it over quietly. We're gonna let them have their religion. They can call themselves Christian all they want. We're just gonna quietly convince them that murdering babies is fine. And they have. That's the incredible thing. That it's like, as you say, exactly, the communism of Russia to us is like, wow, these people are stupid. But you're totally right. What are we doing? We're murdering babies and old people. I mean, what? It's so insane. And I hope, God willing, 50 years from now, people are going to look back on this time and be like, wow, those people were stupid. I hope. I
Mm.
hope. I mean, hopefully,
Mm.
God willing, in 50 years that people figure it out. We'll see.
I will see. So, Kevin, if you agree, we can go some minutes on ahead regarding our topic,
Hmm.
talking about briefly talk about the methods to suppress scientific dissent in the Soviet Union. I will list four methods. So, first of all, the political defamation of internal enemies in science. So, here we have the role of the scientist ideologues who became the judges of the scientific theories under Stalin. So, people we were scientifically not really competent, but as we said before, politically trustworthy. They were the judges of, for example, biology with Trofim Lysenko, of cosmology with other names, and so on. Second, regular conferences guided by the party, of course, on the ideological problems in the sciences and their correct interpretation, and they were mandatory for all scientists. So once the party had spoken, you have to follow the line in biology, in geology, and cosmology, and so on. So the third point is the strongest one, and maybe I think it's not very widely known: the physical liquidation of the enemies of the people in science. So the repression of scientists reached its maximum, its peak, at the time of the Great Purges under Nikolai Yezhov, who was the leader of the NKVD, so the Soviet policy service from 1936 to 1938. Then Nikolai Yezhov himself was arrested and executed because the revolution uses you, but then when you are not necessary, you go away. So that's what happened to Nikolai Yezhov. As for astronomy, in 1936, a counter-revolutionary plot was discovered, the so-called Pulkovo affair, which was totally fake, totally fake, totally fake, involving scientists in Leningrad, Moscow, Novosibirsk, Kiev, Kharkov, Dnipro, Tashkent, and elsewhere. Within 2 years, 20% of Soviet astronomers will suffer arrest, gulag, or death.
Wow.
20%, between 15 and 20% of Soviet astronomers. Their past trips abroad, the collaboration with foreign scientists, the scientific freedom, and the fact that they accepted Western ideology, Western theories, the beginning of the universe, were perfect indictments, elements of suspicion. Because if you say that under Stalin, if you say that the universe had a beginning, you're a potential enemy of the party. So you can plot against Soviet Union and so on. And that it is an historical truth. It is a fact. It happened, really happened. But another problem is that the colleagues, the public opinion, and the scientific journals reacted by confirming the goodness of the purges. So you have these editorial articles in scientific journals, which say literally the party was right. There is the applause of the general applause of the nation around Stalin and the purges and so on. It was a terrible time because even saying nothing about the purgings could mean you didn't accept the party line and the struggle in favor of the revolution. So if you say nothing, if you said nothing, it could be a danger for you, because it could mean you in your consciousness you didn't accept what the party had done. So even the possible was, first of all, you talk against your colleagues, which is very bad, which is very bad. You talk against your colleagues who work with you for a lifetime. Second possibility, you talked against the arrest, and it means you were arrested. Third possibility, you said nothing, but it could mean you in your consciousness you didn't accept these facts. It's like in George Orwell's 1984. It was all true. The official reports for the families of the astronomers who fell into disgrace was 10 years in prison without right of correspondence. So these astronomers were killed, and the official communication for the family was 10 years in prison without right of a correspondence, but they were all gone. And only in the 80s and in the 70s, families discovered, and also in some cases in the 50s, what really happening with their loved ones. So terrible, terrible, terrible. So famous astronomers lost their lives. Boris Gerasimovich, who was the director of Pulkovo, Boris Numerov, the director of the Moscow Astronomical Institution, Matvei Bronstein, a young and talented mathematician, and George Gamow, which is who was American, who was Ukrainian in the origin, and was able to escape from the USSR. And he was a very great physicist and cosmologist of the 20th century, who died in 1968, and he was able to escape from the Soviet Union. But it was very rare to be able to do that. He had the possibility to do that with his wife, because he went abroad for a conference, and he remained there
Smart.
and never never went back to the Soviet Union.
Wow.
And then there was the direct political intervention of the party, especially in the Cold War, where when Stalin entrusted Andrei Zhdanov, a Soviet politician, to conduct a campaign for ideological purity in sciences and culture. Because, Kevin, during the so-called Great Patriotic War, so the war between the Third Reich and the Soviet Union, there was a relative freedom in religion, because Stalin needed people. The party needed people, needed the soldiers to be really motivated on the front. So there was a sort of relaxation. But after the war, Stalin did, okay, we stop any relaxation, and we take the culture and the science back.
Crazy. Yeah, it's incredible, and it really is. Again, it's just remarkable to see and how quickly it can go like this, right? This is just you had a monarchy, and then obviously 1917 they're overthrown and murdered, and then just really a couple decades later, it's this crazy. I mean, it's just incredible how quickly things can go downhill, and scary. Something again we need to be careful and make sure this doesn't happen to us.
Yeah. And one last thing I would like to say is that the Soviet Union had really great scientists, great mathematicians, great physicists, because after Stalin there was the space race. So the first artificial satellite was Soviet. The first living being in history in the space was Soviet. The first time the hidden side of the moon was observed was from a Soviet artifact. The first man in space in history was Yuri Gagarin, and so on. So Soviet astronomers, Soviet scientists in general, did really have a great capacity, a great talent. But only after Stalin they were able to express it entirely.
Fascinating. Yeah, it really is. That really is fascinating. It makes you wonder what could Russia have been without communism. It's an incredible thing, and I just always have to compare it to now. Let's be careful because I mean, what kind of things are being pushed down now because of governments? It's
Yeah,
a interesting thought, and I think that's yeah. I guess when you look at the past and you see the Catholic Church, I mean, I don't remember ever hearing the Catholic Church telling, putting someone to death because they were teaching a science, different than their right. I mean, it's just not how it worked. I mean, these things it's a really dangerous road to go down, obviously, as we see. If you start saying, hey, you're not allowed to, okay, you can't talk about that. Okay, next, you can't just not talk about it. Now you have to say our line. And hey, by the way, if you don't say our line, then you're going to prison or we're going to kill. It's just so crazy how fast it goes. And how quickly the state can take over. And it's sad though, as you say, it really is sad. It makes you really wonder what could have been. What could have
yeah,
been if the monarchy had prevailed. I guess I guess it's a question about a lot of Europe, I suppose. If the monarchies had survived, in the Catholic monarchies especially, we'd have a very different world than we do now. No, absolutely fascinating. Well, Mauro, as always, wow, my brain is about to explode, but in a good way, in a good way. Really, really good information and really thought provoking. Um, and as always, I hope we can do it again sometime. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any last thoughts before we go, but really
No,
good
I
stuff.
think it was enough. Thank you, Kevin.
Perfect. Well, again, Mauro, thank you very much. Oh, and you have a YouTube channel. Can you share that again so that people can? I think I have it here somewhere.
Okay, I can.
What's the
How
name
can I
of it?
do that?
I had to have had it.
Scuo-
I had it written down somewhere. Let's see.
Scuola di filosofia di Fornace. It's
Yeah,
in Italian, but I do have some
thought I
English
did.
videos.
Yeah, that's right. I'll make sure I'll attach those links. I know you've sent it to me per email, I think, before, Mauro. So
Okay.
I'll attach those links to the show because they're
Okay.
also
And if you want,
very
Kevin,
interesting.
I'm currently working on the English translation of the book Stalin and the Universe.
Oh,
So
great.
I think I need some months, maybe 2 or 3, but then the work regarding Stalin and the universe, and also after Stalin, what happened in the Soviet Union after
Hmm.
Stalin, is going to be published during the summer, I think.
Well, great. Well, that's exciting. Great. Well, when you publish it, we will definitely have you on again, and we'll make sure that we get people to give that a read
Okay,
because
thank you.
that is, and again, it's important stuff. It's stuff that I think we need to know our history, and it's and fascinating. It really really is fascinating what could have been, and how these crazy leaders could get in charge and just say no, no, that's not how it works. There's no God. There's no God. You're all gonna, if you don't agree with me, you're all going to prison. Crazy. But good stuff. Awesome. Then we'll have you on soon, Mauro. And I know we hopefully we can continue our discussions about science and the faith, in the Catholic Church, I should say, because
Okay.
again, I think that there are so many misconceptions about this entire topic, which we've covered in previous podcasts, and hopefully we'll continue to cover in the future. Again, Mauro, thank you very much. Everyone, please like, share, subscribe, comment. If you have any questions for Mauro, go ahead and comment here in YouTube, and I'm sure Mauro will keep an eye on them. But don't ask me; I don't know any of this stuff. But certainly a fascinating conversation, Mauro. We'll see you next time,
Thank you.
and good luck on publishing your book in English. We're excited to see it. So until
Thank
next
you.
time, God
Bye
bless you.
bye.